Hello, hi everyone. How's it going? My name is Bonnie Violet. I am a trans femme, genderqueer, spiritual drag artist, and digital chaplain. And in case you don't know where you are at Dragon Spirituality with our my special series called Idaho Drag is Divine that will be taking place over the next about 4 weeks. So far, I have 7 confirmed booked drag artists. I am looking to have 10 to 12 within the next 30 days. So if you yourself are interested or you know someone who would be interested, please do have them reach out to me. I still have a little bit of time to schedule some folks. But basically, there is a lot of conversations that are happening about us as drag artists all over. And I thought it would be great for us to have an opportunity for us to talk more about ourselves and give people an opportunity to hear our stories from our mouths, the complicated, um, the beautiful, the tragic, the creative, all the things that come with drag. And to me, drag is spiritual in nature in the sense of that I think that it gives life and brings life to not only me as a drag artist, but the audience and the folks that I get to share my drag with. I see people's eyes light up, and it's just been such a magical experience. And even just in a technical term, I grew up in church. I grew up with pastors and being of service and those sorts of things. And I just have always seen drag artists even before I started doing drag as kind of like our not to get too in much of a Christian lens, but kind of like our preachers are. They're the ones out in community that are helping to raise money to take care of us. They are the ones who are able to bring um, topics and issues to the forefront that need to be discussed. And we're just always out in community, and so there's not much hiding us. So I think in a lot of ways we just kind of get we get to get caught in the crossfire sometimes, and all that sort of stuff. But I think that's just par for the course. I'm really excited, not to belabor it any further, but my first guest, who I'm really excited to get to meet them and get to know them a little bit more. And so I'm going to go ahead. I think they're about ready for me to go ahead and bring them on the screen. Hello.
Hello.
How are you?
I'm doing pretty good. Yourself?
I'm doing good. I'm so glad that you could join us this evening or afternoon, I guess, huh? It's like,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Do you have the sound seems like it's a little low. I'm not sure.
1 second. I'm just
Sorry, folks. This is just what happens. Just gotta go roll with the punches.
gonna. All right.
That seems better.
Yeah.
Now if we can get it to stay where it needs to stay.
Yeah.
Awesome, awesome. I think the sound seems a lot better on this end. So
hmm
um do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself real quick to folks? Tell us a little bit about you.
I perform under the name Faeryl Sweet. I'm from Idaho, Boise area. I live in a little suburb town called Kuna my whole life. That's
Mm,
pretty fun. Um, I'm part of a drag troupe called the Gendertainers. It's a pretty brand new troupe that's comprised of non-binary and genderqueer and trans drag artists in the area, which is really cool. Um, I don't really know.
no, that's great. That's a good way to get started. So you are my 46th drag artist, and so one of the first questions I always ask is for you to feel if you would share a little bit about what your experience was with spirituality or religion as a young person, maybe what you were taught or what just comes to mind when you think about like spirituality as a child. And if you'd like to share maybe a story or some of your experience with that to get us started, that would be great.
Okay. Yeah, so I grew up in the LDS church, also known as the Mormon church. That was kind of just like my whole entire spirituality growing up. Like that's the only thing I had really had exposure to. Um, all my friends pretty much were Mormon.
Mhm.
I was Mormon. And I was one of the good Mormon kids. I know like a lot of kids will be like Jack Mormons, but no, my family was all just like very religious Mormons, and that's like both sides of my family. So that was basically just my experience was growing up under Mormonism and all that
Mm.
that comes with that. And for people who don't know, Mormonism, aka the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, is a sort of fringe Christian religion that believes that there's another book besides the Bible called the Book of Mormon, and that there was a prophet named Joseph Smith, and there's kind of that. But they're also kind of well known for being um, not the most welcoming to queer folks.
Mm.
And it's a very colonizing religion in that its main goal is to spread um, their religion throughout the world, basically. And it is kind of a worldwide religion at this point, but only for the sake of, you know, missionaries who go abroad and bring that faith to others. And so growing up with that, it was just kind of expected that I would grow up straight, cis, be a woman, marry a man, have babies. Um, and so that's just kind of what I did. I grew up. I had a little phase my senior year of high school where I kind of stopped going to church, but um, then there was just a moment one day where like just something hit me and I was like, you know what? I want to do the church thing. I want to get married in the temple. And for those who don't know, the temple is where like all the, as they term, like covenants and ordinances get done except for baptism. Um, like there's something called the endowment, which is like where you go in and supposedly you make promises with God, and it's all very gendered and very strictly like boy girl lines, right?
Mm.
So having that experience where like, you know, I went into the temple and did that, um, and then eventually got married in the temple as well, which is only open to temple recommend holding Mormons.
Mm-hmm.
um,
And were you feeling good about this up until this point? Like, were you
I
happy?
I was happy for a long time, and it was something that really did it. It offered structure,
Mm-hmm.
and that's kind of what I've come to realize is that for a lot of people, religions like this will offer good structure for them to kind of just like base their lives around. And for some people, it really works. For some people, they grow up with that and it's what they want. And I mean, I'm surrounded by people who are still in the church since pretty much my whole family, except for my two younger siblings, um, are kind of just still in the church. Like,
Mm-hmm.
so like there's a degree of accepting that comes with that now. Um, even as I kind of like I got to a point where I started questioning things and realizing, okay, I might not be cut out for this. This is not really working for me.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't make me happy anymore. I'm a little older and I've got different ideas about the world, and
Mm-hmm.
I've met more people and had more opportunities to just be an adult and
And when did
see
that?
what the world is more about. And as I got exposed to more, you know, queer lines of thinking, quite honestly, I
Mm-hmm.
became a very progressive Mormon. And I was exposed to a lot more queer people um, who didn't fit the mold of the perfect Mormon. And that was really appealing to me. And I noticed a lot of them ended up eventually leaving. And I started to sympathize with that and empathize and realize, you know, I probably would be a lot happier if I wasn't a part of this anymore.
Mm.
So I just kind of stopped going to church.
And
Um,
when was this that you like in your life, like how old were you or what was going on when this started to
yeah.
change for you?
It really started to change after I got married. So I was 19 when I got married.
Hmm.
I was quite young. Um,
But that's fairly like kind of the norm, right? The
yeah,
social norm. Yeah.
yeah, it's definitely the norm, and not even just for Mormons. A lot of people that I grew up with who were Christian, as I started, you know, branch out from like having Mormon friends once I started school, like a lot of Christian kids from will get married pretty young too. That's fairly typical. And what you see a lot of the time is that these marriages don't tend to last unless they're really in it. But it kind of started after I got married. I went through a depressive phase, and kind of realized that it was really hard for me to go to church, and I just didn't for a while. And then me and my then spouse were really good about going to church for a while after that. I had my first kid, and they made a policy in my stake, which is like a group of, like, there's wards, which are like smaller groups of people who go to church all together, and then there's stakes, which is like a bigger group of people comprised of those smaller groups. My stake implemented a policy that if you were late to church, you couldn't take the sacrament. And that was kind of my first feeling of like exclusion, and kind of starting to recognize some of the cracks in the logic that I had grown up with.
And not having access to the sacrament, what did that mean for you?
It was kind of a gut punch at first, until I started to kind of realize that I didn't feel like I needed it in order to feel spiritually fulfilled anymore. Like, when you're growing up Mormon, it's kind of like the sacrament is like, it's you renewing your covenants with God. It's an experience where like every week you go and you take the sacrament and you're able to be reminded of all the promises you made to God and stuff like that. And like, it was not super easy to kind of be like faced with that cognitive dissonance of like, oh, you're supposed to do this and you need to do this in order to be clean, but also, sorry, you can't come in because you were late to church.
Right. So it almost kind of took you away from access to that time with God?
Yes. I was pregnant with my first kid at the time, and I was not doing so well. Like, I found out with my second child that I was actually anemic, which is probably why I was having so much trouble first time around. Yeah, it made me extremely sick and lightheaded to be in the warm chapel with everybody. So I basically had to just sit in the foyer, and I couldn't take the sacrament. Medically speaking, I couldn't, even though I could show up to church.
Right.
It was quite the experience.
I can imagine. I can imagine that had been probably fairly frustrating and really difficult. Were there other folks that were having a similar situation, or were you feeling fairly isolated through this?
There were other folks who had similar things happen, but it wasn't a super regular thing as far as I could tell. Like, I didn't notice any particular crowd hanging out in the foyer on Sundays.
Right.
It was mostly just me and like the occasional parent who came out with their child who was being disruptive, and they wanted to keep it quiet in there. Or occasionally, a family would show up late, and they would, honestly, some of them would just sometimes sneak into the back, which I thought about doing, but the air conditioning was broke that summer. So
yeah,
I couldn't, it would make me sick.
yeah. And so, what kind of caused you to finally kind of let go?
That would be a few years later. I kind of started coming into my queerness a little bit more, and I identified as pansexual. And that, combined with all of the experiences that I'd had with, not feeling really welcome there. And then for other reasons, I started feeling less welcome. Like I always felt like the odd one out with how strictly gendered the church is. I never really felt like I fit into that. And those feelings, as I sort of came into my queerness in terms of my sexuality, started kind of like coming out in more gendered ways of just like, okay, so maybe I'm not cis, actually. Maybe I am non-binary. Maybe I identify with some femininity and a little bit of masculinity. Maybe I'm gender fluid, and just kind of experimenting with those thoughts.
And was this all happening during your marriage?
Yes.
Yeah.
This was all happening during my marriage. it came to a head like right at the end when I kind of realized that I'm not really attracted to men.
Mhm.
And I was married to a man, so obviously that was a problem. And that was honestly kind of the thing that really cut the cord for me was the way that my spouse at the time was reacting to all of this. At first, it was fine. We agreed to open up our marriage so I could experiment with dating women and non-binary folks because it was something that I felt strongly about, um, wanting to have this experience so that I could, know.
Right, right.
And um, yeah, it was all well and good until it wasn't suddenly, and I can't blame him for that. He changed his mind. That's fine.
Yeah.
Um, but it didn't end up all being well communicated all sides around. We both had our own mental health problems,
Mhm.
and neither of us grew up in like super great communicative homes. So
Right,
there was a
right.
lot that went into that, but that's neither here nor there. The spirituality aspect, just like, um, it just coming into that queerness really just brought it home that, it was no longer my spiritual home. It was no longer
Mm.
something that was doing any good for me, and it was doing more harm than good to stay.
Right.
So I left.
Yeah. And what was your first experience with drag? When did you first see or were introduced to drag?
Um, the first time I went to drag, well, the first time I went to a drag show was the first Pride I ever went to, which is like back in 2019, and I went with a close friend at the time. And I saw a drag show, and I immediately just kind of like something clicked, and I was like, that seems really cool. But with the things that happened over the next year, 2020, the end of 2020 was when I split up with my ex. It just kind of was not a priority to think about,
Yeah.
until one of my friends and I kind of got back in touch and reconnected after a few years of not really seeing each other. And we started going out to the bar to just, enjoy the scenery and see the drag shows.
Yeah.
And then they thought about it and they were like, I think I want to do drag. And I was thinking about it too. And I was like, I think I wanted to. And then they did their first show. And they were doing shows for a little while.
Mhm.
And then, they had a number idea that they wanted to do. And they hit me up and they're like, hey, I want to do this duet. Will you do it with me? I know you've been thinking about doing drag. And I was like, okay, I guess I'm doing drag now. And that's just kind of how it started.
Yeah. What was it that drew you to doing drag yourself? What took you from like being a spectator, if you will, to somebody who wanted to do drag?
Yeah. I've always been into performing ever since I was younger. It started with like church choirs as a kid, and I did like a little singing and dancing group that sang like Broadway and popular music from like the late 90s.
Mhm.
Um, and that was my jam. I was really into that. And then, I did choir in high school and marching band and theater eventually. And it just really brought out this part of me that felt very much myself, like
Mhm.
not in a way that I had ever really experienced before. It felt more me than me.
Mhm.
And, there's just something about like getting ready for shows and the process of just like becoming something that felt different than what I was experiencing at the time. Um,
What
that
would you have
really
called
drew me
that
to the performing
experience?
arts.
Mhm.
And that kind of just, I didn't really get to do a lot in my younger adult life. Kind of being a Mormon and a mom, I just didn't have opportunities. And I didn't bring myself very many opportunities because I was supposed to stay at home with the kids.
Mhm.
But, when I did finally see drag and have that experience of like feeling drawn to it and then having someone really pull me in and say like, hey, let's do this. Let's actually do it. Like
Um,
that was just kind of like what started it.
right, right. When you identify as a drag thing, and would you like to tell folks who maybe aren't, like what that means to you as far as what it means to be a drag thing?
Yeah. Being a drag thing comes in a lot of different flavors, but like the most bare basic form of drag thing would be just like not quite a king and not quite a queen. Um, Anything in between, anything outside of those, drag things can present very femme like a queen if they want, or very masc like a king if they want. Um, but always just not there.
Right. And so maybe even like a non-binary type. I think for
Yeah.
folks who maybe are, like I'm thinking of like folks who aren't part of the queer community who might,
Mhm.
like be aware of kind of the masculine or the feminine or quote
Yeah.
unquote male and female or queen and king. And thing can be kind of a mixture of those or completely different, all that sort of stuff, right? What
Yeah.
what drew you what drew you to being a thing versus a king or a queen?
I just didn't feel like being a queen and I didn't feel like being a king. And I felt like wanting to be able to do either or both if I wanted to without the pressure of like having to fit into one gendered box. Cause I do feel like more of me when I'm on stage than I am usually. Like that's kind of just like what my persona is. It's me, but more and sometimes different, just playing around with expression and going for more than usual.
Hmm.
Um, and I'm non-binary, so that was a very natural fit for me.
Yeah, yeah. Awesome. And for you, I know like for me, I didn't start really living into my transness until
Mhm.
I started drag. How did one come before the other for you or?
They honestly kind of came together at the same time. Like I realized that I was non-binary sometime around the like a little bit after that I was out as pansexual at the time. Um, but I didn't really start feeling it or feeling like I could express it in different ways until I kind of started distancing myself from the church
Hmm.
and really had more ways to just sort of express my gender without feeling needing to fit into a box.
Yeah.
Um, and then drag kind of just came along with that as I split from my ex and was able to just be independent and not have to fit a specific expectation.
Hmm.
So yeah.
Yeah. How is your family? How is your family with that? And that can be very broad, but
Yeah.
how would you say family interacts with you being a drag thing?
Um, yeah, honestly, my family took it pretty well. Like I'm not super um necessarily open about like what types of performances I do since
Hmm.
um sexuality is pretty taboo. Um, but I actually got really, really fortunate with the family that I had when I moved back home with my family. Um, I expected them to not really be welcoming of me being queer or anything like that, but I had two closeted younger siblings who came out as non-binary on their own terms as
Hmm.
well, and my parents were surprisingly accepting. Um, and I think that like that was just kind of like really nice to just have that sort of foundation. And then when my mom at least found out that I do drag, she was kind of just like her main question was just like, um, do you do sexualized things or is it just more along the lines of performing? And I didn't really know what to say because
Yeah.
sexuality is just so taboo
Hmm.
if you're Mormon. So just was kind of like, yeah, I know, I just perform mostly. Um,
Yeah. And how would you say sexuality is or isn't connected to your drag?
I'd say it's definitely kind of intrinsic. I identify as demisexual as well, so it's really interesting to be able to go out on stage and just kind of like express without the pressure or need of like actually engaging with anybody specifically.
Hmm.
I do feel like sexuality is something like a lot of people, I feel like it's very connected with my spirituality. And so having that outlet and having that connected to something that's already so spiritual for me, which is performing, and that process of sort of becoming and expressing, um, is just really it's something that comes out when it comes out, and when it's not a sexual performance, it's not a sexual performance. So
Hmm. Yeah, well, it sounds like you're fairly integrated in the sense of I hear spirituality, I hear sexuality, I hear
Mhm.
gender, I hear even just family and all that. It all seems like it seems to be interconnected. It's not like I think oftentimes things are compartmentalized.
Oh yeah.
Um, what would you say kind of causes that all to come together for you? Has it been difficult to get to that place, or has it all
Oh
just kind of made sense?
yeah, it's definitely been difficult to get to that place. That was one of the things that was kind of like the impetus for me realizing that I'm not attracted to men. I identify as lesbian in simple terms, but I'm attracted to non-binary people as well, so that's broader terms.
Right, right.
And when I was coming into that, like I just kind of started realizing how compartmentalized my life was and
Mm,
how I felt sort of divorced from church and that sort of culture, while at the same time having my experience with dating a woman um, being separate from my home life.
mm,
And that was, kind of a necessary thing. My ex and I were living with my then in laws. And so, like, it was for safety, really, that I
right.
couldn't be open and out loud about any of it. But once I realized that, and once things really started to snowball in terms of like getting split up and like, um, then eventually getting a divorce and um, all that good stuff, getting a job, doing things that I'd never had to do before because my husband always did it.
Right.
Um, it very naturally just kind of all flowed together in a very symbiotic way, and it was really freeing.
Mhm. And Callie j Callie says, "It can be difficult for parents to realize their children have sexualities."
Mhm.
For sure, and I think, when we think of sexuality too, I think people often talk about, like, it always goes to the behavior. It's all always about, like, sexual behavior, but sexuality is so much, like, more than that. I do agree with it. It's almost like a spirituality. Sexuality is just a part of us. It's not something that I don't know, it's just always with us, you know what I mean? And that
Yeah.
doesn't mean we're having sex. That just means that we have a sexuality. We have a sexuality is at play in more than just, like, sexual behavior.
Oh yeah. Sexuality. I feel like when I was kind of like learning what demisexual meant for myself, I did a lot of like exploring like different kinds of attraction and stuff like that. And so it just felt very natural to just kind of like identify as demisexual for me. But for those who don't know, there's different types of attraction. There's sexual attraction, there's
Mhm.
romantic attraction, there's aesthetic attraction, which I experience for all genders. Imagine how confusing that is. And then platonic attraction, all these different kinds of like attraction and love that a person can experience. But a lot of times in the media, it just gets boiled down to
Mhm.
sex and romance, which is, you know, valid for some people, but for others, it's a little bit more complicated and not as strict as like my sexuality is wanting to have sex with somebody or wanting to go on a date with somebody and get cuddly. Like it's not straightforward always.
Right, right, right. There's maybe a little bit of gray area, or even it sounds like there's a lot of exploration.
Oh yeah.
Um, yeah, yeah. How would you say that your spirituality, how would you identify, label, how is it that you experience your spirituality today?
Um, to put it easy, I just kind of identify as like kind of like omnitheist agnostic witch, which is kind of like a lot. Some aspects of Gnosticism in the sense that like when it comes to the Bible, and I do kind of believe in the Christian gods, but when it comes to the Bible, I don't think that the Old Testament God was very loving or kind.
Mm,
And I think that there's a lot to be learned from Gnosticism as well, just in regards to expanding your understanding of Christianity and things like that. And then I do also identify with other deities as well, not just Jesus or the spirit. I do like the idea of the universe. I'm very drawn to deities that kind of um, explore concepts of like life and death and rebirth and things like that. That's a concept that I really identify with. Like I do tarot readings for myself and others on occasion. And that's something that really resonates with me as like symbolism for expressing ideas and exploring concepts in one's life. Not necessarily like telling the future, but exploring the future,
Mm-hmm.
exploring opportunities and ideas and possibilities. And one of my favorite tarot cards is the death card.
Mm.
So I'm very drawn to like there's this one Egyptian goddess, not very well known. Her name is Kabet. I probably totally botched that pronunciation, but she is the daughter of Anubis, you know, the god of like the underworld. And
Mm-hmm.
she brings water to those who have died before they're judged. And that's something that I don't know, that really struck me when I learned about it. And then there's also Marana, which is a Slavic goddess. I have Slavic ancestry on my dad's side. Um, very like Croatian, like a quarter of my ancestry is Croatian.
Mm-hmm.
So as an adult, I've been like kind of exploring that. And there's this goddess Marana who's just kind of viewed as like this goddess of winter and death. And um, they burn an effigy of her. People who worship her or not necessarily worship her but fear her will
Mm-hmm.
burn an effigy of her every come spring to just kind of like bring about her rebirth as the goddess of spring and life.
Mm-hmm.
And so my spirituality is kind of very centered around like this process of like um the death of oneself and the life of oneself and the transitional period and just the cycles of being one way and then becoming something new.
Yeah, yeah. And what would you say the function of that is for you? What do you get from like, yeah, I'll leave it at that.
um like for me, it doesn't necessarily look like rituals, although I do enjoy a good ritual from time to time. It's more along the lines of just concepts and ideas that offer structure to my understanding of the world. And um, like in terms of like witchcraft, I would definitely consider myself a chaos witch because I just put energy into things more so than do rituals about things.
Gotcha.
And that's something that just resonates with me and um, how I practice my spirituality.
Mm-hmm.
Um, a lot of it comes out in just like creating things or sitting down and like relaxing and like playing a video game and just like kind of meditating during that process. Like, um, yeah.
Yeah. And how would you say, I've been doing drag for a little while, and I feel like
Mhm.
sometimes my spirituality is something that often is not something that's brought to the drag table, so to speak. Has spirituality been a part of your drag experience with other drag artists, or?
I would say it definitely has, since I do put a lot of my spirituality and my energy like into that, process of becoming and just like the idea of like becoming someone else on stage, but it's really me. Like,
Yeah.
so it kind of just like naturally feels a little spiritual. And that feeling of connecting with the audience just kind of fuels something in me
Hmm.
in terms of my spirituality. Um, and like the connectivity to other people is really what does it. That feeling of familiarity of home, so to speak, of just like knowing that you're welcomed and connected to other people. Um, so it doesn't necessarily go into the performance or how I do plan a performance, but it does come out like in the actual performance itself, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes total sense. I totally
Mhm.
hear that. And we have about 10 minutes left of the conversation. And so I wanted to invite folks who are watching or listening to us to feel free to, put in the comments any questions that you may have. Yeah, like I said, we have about 10 minutes left. And I wanted to ask you what kind of drew you to wanting to participate in this conversation today?
Yeah. So my friend Chico actually introduced our little like gender tainers group chat, our troop that we're both in. to well, they said that you were doing this, and so they sent a link, and I was interested. I was immediately intrigued because I've, you know, got that I resonate with spirituality. And it was really interesting to think about, like, because I hadn't really thought about it a lot before then, but then I started thinking about it more, and I was like, oh yeah, you know what? My spirituality is kind of really connected to my queerness and my drag and my art. That's probably something that I would be interested in doing. So I
Yeah.
put my name in for it.
Yeah, awesome. That's great. And that's really a lot of why I like having these conversations is one, I
Mhm.
think, some of us, I think we do have there's something, it did give us life, right? And I think a lot
Mhm.
of us maybe had complicated experiences with religion or
Mhm.
spirituality in some way. And I feel like I know for me, there's been many times in my life when I didn't feel like certain things could exist together. And then I noticed that actually all those parts were there the whole time. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Like
Yes.
it actually is not ever not present, but I can kind of not be aware of it. And so
Mhm.
there's like this awareness that comes to being able to see, claim, and I think speak to some of this stuff. We do have a question, I believe.
Mhm.
Callie says, what has been your favorite number you've done as part of Gendertainers? Have you performed a number you found specifically spiritual?
Ooh.
Great question.
Um, Honestly, my favorite number I've done is in the Gendertainers. Kind of be trying to think. I've kind of got two that are my babies and they're my favorites. But if I had to pick one, I've got to say, there was like a Alice in Wonderland themed show that we did, the Gendertainers, and um, I was the card guard for that.
Mm,
We all were just different characters. We just did numbers kind of inspired by that. Um, and in terms of just a point blank, like favorite number, absolutely my favorite. I got to dress up like a giant playing card made of playing cards. Wave a scythe around like I was like, the executing card. It was just fun. Good
right.
pure fun. And then in terms of spiritual performances, actually before I joined the Gendertainers, there was one. There's a song called Good Girls. I can't remember the artist right now, but it goes like, uh, it's just basically about like defying the norm of being a girl
Mm,
and not fitting into other people's boxes of what being a good girl is. And I do identify with femininity somewhat. I like to be distinct. I identify as a demigirl. So I identify with like being non-binary and with being a girl sometimes. And so it was just a really good fitting song for that. And the performance actually happened to be on the day that Roe v. Wade was overturned.
oh, wow.
And so that was probably the most sort of spiritual performance I've really had. Just getting to just like be very one with my body and um, express and have like like my body, my choice on my back. And it just was a very fitting song for the occasion too. So yeah.
Mhm. What would you say to somebody who maybe is curious about doing drag? What would you like, I guess, what sort of advice would you have for them?
Oh, try it out. You never get anywhere without starting somewhere, and somewhere is usually, I don't know if you've ever seen like the pictures of like queens and kings who like the first time they do drag versus like now.
Mhm.
Everybody starts somewhere, and there's no shame in not being the best. I know sometimes like I know for me, like I'm very much a perfectionist. It's not like I'm competitive, but um I'm just a perfectionist and I want everything to be perfect. And I've been doing drag for a little over a year, and I'm just now getting to a point where like I'm comfortable with a performance not being exactly like I want it. Um, and other people might be like that too. That's fine. You don't have to have a perfect performance. Um, Even if you mess up, like half the time the audience doesn't know. Um, Doing your makeup for the first time, for the first couple times, maybe for the first time 5 times is gonna feel maybe a little foreign and unnatural, but you'll get better at it. You will. You really do. Um, and outfits, I know there's a lot of pressure to have like the most glamorous, beautiful outfits. That's fine. If you have the resources for that, that's fine. But you can also just start somewhere. You
Mhm.
can express your gender in a stage setting without having to be covered from head to toe in rhinestones. It's valid. Yeah. And thrift stores are your best friend.
Yeah. No, I think that's some of the best advice. It's like, just do it. I know for years I wanted to do drag and I just never did it because like, I don't know if I just thought I had to be like perfect, like when I got started. So one other question I wanted to ask you too is what do you see in the future for drag in Idaho?
I see, honestly, we've been like our troop, the gender trainers, we've been very, very lucky and very fortunate to have a lot of really accepting community members. There's actually, I don't know, it feels surprising to me how many non-binary and genderqueer and performers that we have. Our troupe definitely does not comprise all of them. We've had a lot of them featured as guest performers in some of our shows, but I definitely see Idaho drag becoming much more accepting of non-binary individuals, which is extremely fortunate. Not everywhere has that. It's really nice to have people become more welcoming of us and recognize us as drag things and not have to feel pressured. Like, obviously there are individuals who do put on that pressure sometimes, but it seems more far and few between, and maybe I've just been lucky. But I see a lot more of that regardless.
Yeah. No, and Boise, Idaho is probably one of the last places that people, or Idaho in general, is like one of the last places people think drag community would be, and even probably very say non-binary drag for sure. And that's one thing I think the community in Idaho, the drag community it's vast, it's deep, and it's it is really some of the best drag I've seen in the country. So it's super exciting. Yeah. When I left Idaho a decade or so ago, I had I had my own fears of just drag in general, I think because of my internalized transphobia or whatever. But I've definitely seen such a huge change in just kind of the mentality and the people and I don't know, but I think a lot of it is just I've changed a lot and I've opened up a lot more to, I think, seeing the world as a little bit, I don't know, just more than what I could see before,
Yeah, it gives you a little perspective.
For sure. So I want to give you a chance to share or speak to anything else that you would like to share that maybe we haven't got to yet, or maybe even something you just want to say again.
Trans liberation is important. There's a lot of transphobia going around in Idaho right now, a lot of misunderstanding. We see it around the country, but community is everything. Chosen family is just as important, more important than blood family. Some people are lucky to have supportive blood family. Some people are not. You can still build a home and a family without that. And there are safe people out there. Sometimes it feels like there's not. But through what's happening right now, that community is more important than ever. That chosen family is more important than ever because they're not going to stop. We can't stop either. We've got to push back. Otherwise, they're just going to keep going. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate you taking the time to chat with us today and to kind of put yourself out in the world, if you will, in the way that you do, and to share so much of yourself with us today. And for folks who are listening to us either after the show or watching us now, thanks so much for joining us, and do join us or join me with the future guest as early as this Friday and Saturday. Check out the links in the description. You can see, again, I have six other dates that are actually already formed and some others that are in the works. So just check out the links in the descriptions wherever you find this, and take care and have a great evening, everyone. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
I didn't mean to sneak around, but now I'm glad shoes.